Hey everyone, this is us doing a second attempt. We had a bit of problem with audio with the first one, and we're going to be discussing some interesting stuff to do with taxes in Bitcoin, specifically with Canada, but also we're going to move a little bit outside of that and talk about some more general things with Bitcoin, I'd say as well. I'm bringing on my friend Thomas Strolight for this, and
Hey
I'm
there.
going to read a little bit about him now. He's been involved in Bitcoin since mid 2013. He was enamored by the original white paper by Bitcoin's mysterious creator, Satoshi Nakamoto. He invested both money and thousands of hours in learning about and experimenting with Bitcoin. His passion for Bitcoin has only strengthened since, and he spends his working and walking hours each day following the events and developments in the space and thinking about their implications and threats and opportunities. Tom Ayer is an experienced manager, operator, and investor. He has 2 degrees in business from York University's Schulich. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right.
Go
Schulich
for it.
School of Business, one in finance and the other in marketing and strategy. From 1995 to 2012, he worked for one of Canada's leading media companies at the time, Torstar Corp, leading their investment and strategy functions from 2001 to 2005 as managing director of corporate development and building a digital portfolio of investments, wholly owned companies, and partnerships as president of Torstar Digital from 2005 to 2012. He served as executive vice president in charge of private investments in digital businesses for Power Corporation's division Square Victoria Digital Properties from 2013 to 2016. He has also served as chief technology officer for Workopolis, Canada's leading job board, until it was acquired by Indeed Holdings, the world's largest job board. And there's some more, which I'm going to paste in the description. But suffice it to say, my knowledge in this area is pretty low. It's pretty incomplete. All I've ever done is buy Bitcoin off grid, so to speak. And but I've had a million questions since Thomas started explaining to me that you can buy stuff, you can buy Bitcoin in your TFSA account or your RRSP. And he's explained this to me a bunch of times now, and I still am pretty confused with it all. It all comes so naturally to him and so unnaturally to me that no matter how many times you explain it, I'm still going to have all the same questions, which is great for the purposes of
It's
this.
good that it didn't work out the first time because
Yeah,
maybe I'll be a little bit more refined. That's a long intro, so thanks for the introduction.
yeah.
And I think maybe we should just dive in and say, this is kind of the synthesis of two things that people should love, which is buying Bitcoin and saving money on taxes.
Hmm.
So these are both great things that we're going to talk about. Um, and it is principally in a Canadian context because we're going to talk about Canada's two main tax shelter instruments, which are registered retirement savings plans or just retirement savings plans called RRSPs or RSPs,
Hmm.
and tax-free savings accounts, which are called TFSAs. And both of these are instruments that once you have investments inside of them, any transactions that you have, any income that you have, any capital gains that you have are tax-free. In the RSP, they're tax-free until you take the money out when you retire. And in the TFSA, it's tax-free forever. And so we'll talk very briefly, just give people an introductory concept as to what those things are. And then we'll talk about how you can get Bitcoin like instruments inside of those two accounts so that you can invest in Bitcoin and get tax deductions, or at least not ever have to pay taxes on the gains on your Bitcoin. So just very quickly for listeners who don't know, an RSP is a registered retirement savings plan, and the government gives you a certain allotment, a grant that you can invest in it every year, which is dependent upon the income that you earned in that year. And when you do so like after working for a full year, you might find that you're allowed to put in $10,000 or $19,000, which is kind of the annual maximum. And if you ever don't contribute, the amount grows every year. Like you keep adding to it until you contribute the full amount that you're allowed to. The amazing thing about an RSP is when you contribute money into an RSP, the government considers that as income that you did not earn. So they will deduct your earned, and you will be able to deduct that entire amount that you contributed into your RSP from your income that year. So if you earned $100,000 but put 20,000 into your RSP, it's like you only earned $80,000, and so you only owe taxes on $80,000. And if
Hmm.
all those taxes were taken at the source, then you're going to get a refund for the income tax on $20,000, which in Canada for most anybody who's in that income bracket is going to be about 50%. So you can actually look at it as anything that you put into your RSP, the government's kind of funding roughly half of that if that's a tax bracket that you're in. So imagine you get to buy Bitcoin and the government helps pay for half of it.
Does that work with capital gains as well? Supposing I make a big gain and sell, and then I use, you know, if I use
No,
those gains to buy into my RRSP, rather.
no, your RSP is only the amount that you're allowed to put into it is only based off of your income, not your capital gains. So if there's a way that you could convert your capital gains to income, which isn't easy to do, and we won't get into it on this call, then that would permit you to put more into your RSP. But the RSP is really something that's meant for people who are income earners, workers, to have a retirement savings account. Many people will find that their company will sometimes contribute. So you contribute, and you can imagine, like if your company matches, you say dollar for dollar or 50 cents of the dollar. If you put in $1, your company puts in $1, and now you're getting a tax savings on it. So the government's putting in 50 cents. It really is a very effective way to save for your retirement, even if you don't have the benefit of a company contribution. So that's what the RSP is. And I'll talk a little bit about what the TFSA is, and then we'll talk about how investments grow in them, and then we'll talk about what you can put in them. So TFSA is something that's been around. I should have checked. I remember the last time we did this video. It's been around for about 10 or 11 years now. And it's an account that every year, as long as you're over 18 and residing in Canada, it grows by that year's allotment. It has been as high as $6,500. It's now about $6,000 a year. And if you hadn't put any money into it at all ever, and you've been over 18 for the last 11 years, you can probably put about $75,000 into it now. So for people who haven't taken advantage of it, in a tax-free savings account, anything you put into it, whatever happens to it, you don't have to pay tax on it. So you don't have to pay tax on income. You don't have to pay tax on capital gains. You don't have to pay tax on dividends. You don't have to pay tax on anything that happens there. So, if 10 years ago you somehow you couldn't put Bitcoin in it 10 years ago, but if you could have, it would have grown to a tremendous value today, and that would all be tax-free. You can take the money out without any taxation.
That's amazing that it doesn't expire every year; it accumulates.
Yeah, it's a really great thing, and that the government's been terrific about letting. It's not a huge amount of money, right? You can't shove $1 million in it and avoid tax on $1 million, but they give us this little shelter of about $6,000 a year that we can invest and grow that money tax-free. That's all our after-tax money. So we'll put all these pieces together. The next thing that is important to talk about is starting this year on the Toronto Stock Exchange, the Ontario Securities Commission has allowed a couple of companies to operate running what are essentially Bitcoin funds. These are closed-end funds, which means that they can't just keep adding units willy-nilly, but even that's changing. But they're businesses, and you're basically buying a unit or a share in these funds. And the only thing that these funds do is hold Bitcoin. So they're basically custodians of Bitcoin, and the units in the fund are claims on these Bitcoin. And instead of trying to get your Bitcoin out, you just sell your units if you wanted to sell your Bitcoin in them. So the two that have been around that are operating right now at the time of this recording, the one that's been around the longest, it's been around since late April, is called the Bitcoin Fund. It's by a company called 3iQ. And I'll talk a little bit about its history, but it's been doing very well, and it's managing, I think, over 600 million US dollars. Let me just check really quickly here. It's got 693 million US dollars worth of Bitcoin in its custody right now at the time of this recording. That's obviously based on the price and whatnot. But so they're holding on to a lot of Bitcoin, and that's all units that are issued mostly to Canadians, but Americans can buy units in this too. And I think anyone who's from any country that's allowed to buy stocks on the Toronto Stock Exchange can own units in it. And these units typically follow the exact same pattern as Bitcoin. So if Bitcoin's up 10%, the units will generally be up 10% in a day. There is, it turns out that the value of the units on the market actually trade higher than what's called the net asset value, which is the underlying amount of Bitcoin represented by each unit, because there's a limited supply and there's many people who want to buy these things and put them in their RSP and put them in their TFSA. It tends to trade at a premium.
The reason that there'd be a little bit more, there'd be a bit of a cost for doing this because of the advantages you get for doing it this way.
Yeah. And the premiums tend to range between I'd say that it's not atypical to find them at about 15% on average. They'll sometimes range as low as 10%. They'll sometimes go above 20%. But typically they're about 15%. And if you're looking to buy these units and that's the price that you're seeing as a premium, that's probably something that you can expect that when the time comes to sell, you'll probably be able to appreciate that kind of premium as well. I mean, the premiums aren't guaranteed, of course, but the market seems to put a premium on these things for that period of time, or for just in general. So the second fund that operates in Canada that's much newer, it only came out last month in December, is called the CI Galaxy Bitcoin Fund. And it's a similar concept. It's much newer, it's much smaller. It's only been operating for a month and a little bit. It tends to trade at a higher premium. I can't quite explain why. I think maybe just because it's a smaller float, it manages far less money. And so it may just be that whatever demand there is for that, people are paying a higher premium. That typically tends to trade at a 25 to 30% premium. So in general, if you're looking to get the most amount of underlying fundamental Bitcoin, you'd buy whichever fund has the lesser premium. And at the time of this recording, it's pretty consistent that the Bitcoin fund, the one that's bigger and has been around for longer, has the lower premium. So if you're buying on the market, that's probably the one that you'd want to hold on to. Both of these, I'm sorry.
The QBTC one.
The QBTC one. Yeah. And you'll find that, I'd recommend, if people want to look it up, there's a really great Bitcoin dashboard called bitbo.io, bitbo.io. It's done by a couple of Canadian guys, and in it, there's a section called Exchange Traded Products. And in there, you will see the famous American fund, GBTC, but you'll also see right underneath it, QBTC.U, which is denominated in US dollars, and BTCG, which is the Galaxy Bitcoin Fund. And right there, it shows you what the premium is. So you don't have to get out a calculator and do any math yourself. Just go to bitbo.io, scroll down to that part of the page, and you'll be able to see which fund is trading at
bitbo.io, bitbo.io, right?
Correct. Yep. Correct. And it's a great dashboard in general. So if you haven't made it your main dashboard yet, maybe you're looking at Clark Moody's site, that's pretty good too.
Clark Moody's awesome. I don't think it has any of the am I calling them derivatives? Is that what these things are?
No, these I wouldn't call these derivatives. Exchange traded products, and we can't quite call them exchange traded funds because they're these closed end funds, which are slightly different, but they're traded on exchanges. And the nice thing about both of these Canadian ones is they're unlike GBTC, which is traded in the pink sheets, kind of over the counter in the US. These are traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange, which is Canada's largest stock exchange and a very credible and well regulated exchange. So it's easy to buy and sell. There's a lot of liquidity.
I didn't realize GBTC wasn't just traded like in a normal brokerage account. Is it?
No, it turns out it's hard to get. Again, I'm not an expert on US securities, let alone even Canadian securities, but it's not traded on the NASDAQ or on the New York Stock Exchange or one of those leading stock exchanges.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. That implies to me that when an ETF comes out in the States, that their premium really is in trouble, because the GBTC premium is can be up to 40%, right? I think that's
it has been. Yeah, and but lately, and it's not exactly clear why all of these things happen. I mean, people can speculate on it, but lately the GBTC premium fell from 40% down to 20%, and so it's been mostly 20% for a lot of the time. If we were to check bitbo.io at exactly this second, because it's so quick to check, we can validate for one or the other of us. Yeah, GBTC is trading at a 23% premium, QBTC is at 22%, and BTCG, the Galaxy one, is trading at 25%. So they're all actually pretty tight. Now, we're recording this after market hours, so these stocks stop trading at 4 p.m. And as the Bitcoin price moves, it looks like the premium is moving, but that's only because the funds aren't trading at those
that's
hours.
Based on the last. So if Bitcoin pumped $1,000 after the market's closed, then the premium looked huge, but it won't actually be that huge, right?
Right. Now, in this particular case, the numbers I just read are higher than they were at closing because the price of Bitcoin's gone down by a few $100. So, but that's absolutely the case.
So they close at 4 p.m. Is that New York? So is Toronto and New York same time?
Yeah, that's right. It's East Coast time. The markets are open from 9:30 to 4 p.m. And the rest of the time they're closed on Mondays to Fridays and when it's not a holiday. So unlike Bitcoin, which is open 24/7, 365. stock markets are open when they're open. And those
Right.
are the only times you can trade these units. There's not much after hours trading of these units. So listen, in a nutshell, that's kind of the beauty of it. If you have room in your RSP or in your TFSA and you want to invest in Bitcoin, set up a brokerage account and you can buy these units on the open market, whether you're doing self-serve or you have a broker, put them in these instruments. Both of these instruments, any growth, any sales, any capital gains, any dividends, any kind of income, it's all tax free. In the RSP, when you take the money out eventually, which is after you're 55, or you can wait until you're 71 to take the money out of it. But when the money comes out, it's treated as income at that point in time. But you get to grow your funds in their tax-free compounding until the time to take it out. And you can take out only as much as you want. So the amount that stays in there can continue to grow tax-free, and only the amount that you take out is taxed as income at that point in time.
Yeah, I think there's structuring things that way will save you a lot on tax. The longer you can defer the tax, the more Bitcoin you can hold on to, or the less tax you can pay, which does equate to owning more Bitcoin if you look at it. You look at it. So if someone was coming to you and they had, okay, I've just sold my house, I have, a couple of $100,000, I have all of my TFSA allowance that I've never touched it. I'm like, I've got 11 years, or I think you said it's 75 grand, right?
Yeah.
Do you think it's smart for them to stick that all into QBTC, or do you think buy just vanilla Bitcoin, I guess I'll call it, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. So listen, I think it really depends on the person and the circumstances. So I kind of paint what I think the different circumstances are. When you buy these units, that company like QBTC buys Bitcoin and holds Bitcoin for the amount of units that you have. And so you can expect the price of the units to go up, but they're not your Bitcoins to send. Like you can't log on to Bitcoin Core and create a transaction and send those Bitcoins to somebody else. You can't stake them in the Lightning Network. You can't really treat them as Bitcoin. They're a proxy for Bitcoin's price performance. And so if you just want Bitcoin as a store of value and you don't need to self-custody it, you're not concerned about having to flee with your money or hide your money or things like that, then QBTC or any of these other funds are very valid instruments for you to own it. And especially since you're owning it in a tax-free structure, or in the case of the RSP, even getting paid back money, it may be a very sensible thing for you to do. If you really want to be authentic, if you want to authentically own authentic Bitcoin, not a proxy for Bitcoin, then you should buy real Bitcoin and store it yourself, in which case you cannot put it in these tax-free instruments or these tax-sheltered instruments. And when the time comes to sell those Bitcoins, and again, my advice to people, this is not financial advice, of course, my philosophical advice to people is you should buy Bitcoin and you should never sell your Bitcoin. But if you do ever sell your Bitcoin, you have to pay capital gains tax on it, which is why you should never sell your Bitcoin.
Unless you live in Portugal, but this video ain't about that. Eh?
Sure. I'm speaking mostly to Canadians here and people who are attentive, and we can talk why, we can talk why here some other time about why you should never sell your Bitcoin. It's okay to spend it at some point in time, and it's okay to perhaps borrow against it if you need to spend something. But I think it's really advisable for people to hold on to their Bitcoin for a really long time.
Yeah.
So I think that there's two things you can do. Personally, most of the people who I know who are dabbling in or investing heavily in QBTC also have real hardcore Bitcoins off on the side somewhere, but they like QBTC because of the tax advantages it gives them. And some people like to play the premium. If it's in its tax sheltered account, if you sell it when the premium goes up and you buy it when the premium goes down, or if you're, it turns out if you're an accredited investor, which means that you have a certain amount of wealth and investment experience, you're actually able to participate in the issuance of new units, where you can invest in the creation of new units. You don't have to pay the premium for them. You just have to pay an underwriting fee of about 2.5%, and you're forced to hold on to them for at least 4 months and a day. But afterwards, they become freely trading units. So some people will participate in the creation of new units, hold on to them for the required period of time, and then sell them at a premium, and generally roll all the profits of that into the creation of new Bitcoin. So it's kind of a way to generate some yield or some profit, provided that there's a premium for you there after all of the fees that some people can participate in. One other really nice thing that's very new that QBTC is doing, because there's been so much more demand than supply, and they're trying to not have the premium get too high, is they've gotten permission from the Securities Commission here in Ontario to sell new units themselves straight from the fund into the market at the market price. And they seem to have been having success. They only started on December 31st, and when we're speaking now, it's only like January 12th. So it hasn't even been 2 weeks since they got approval, and there were lots of holidays. So there's only been like 6 or 7 open trading days on the market, but it sure looks, from looking daily at their activities, it looks like they've been selling a bunch of units at the market price. So like at a 20% premium. And the really nice thing about that is when the new units get issued at the 20% premium, they buy like 1.2 Bitcoins for every 1 Bitcoin's worth of money that comes in. And that Bitcoin gets pooled across all of the other units, including the new ones. So what ends up happening is fewer units are required to make up the equivalent of one whole Bitcoin. So when the year started, it took about 900 units of QBTC to make up 1 Bitcoin. Because of this accretion from this at the market selling that they've been doing, that's down to 894 units required to make 1 Bitcoin. So it's like 6 less units of the fund make up 1 Bitcoin, and that's in only 2 weeks worth of time. So if this continues, if the demand is high and they continue to sell at the market and at significant volume, you can expect to see, if you buy 1 Bitcoin's worth of units, maybe by the end of the year, that will actually be worth 1.1 Bitcoin.
Wow.
And so that's a really new thing. Like, the accretion, according to that, could sustain, or maybe it won't. The premiums might sustain, or maybe they won't. So these are I think the additional risks beyond that of investing in Bitcoin that are involved in this. Like if you buy at a premium and the premium goes away, you'll end up losing some traction. But if you buy a certain number of units and the Bitcoin per unit actually increases over time because of what that fund is doing, then you might get a gain. So these are risks beyond Bitcoin. I guess one of the other important differences is if you're holding your own Bitcoin, you should learn how to do that, but that comes with responsibility, right? If you're not responsible about it, you could lose your Bitcoin forever, or you could have it stolen from you. With this fund, they have professional custodians, so many would argue that it's easier to custody these things, and they're custodied in the traditional financial framework, right? You just have to have a brokerage account, but you don't have if should the unthinkable happen and these guys get robbed, the Bitcoins that are in your name there get robbed too, or if they should lose them. But all of these companies use professional custodians to custody their Bitcoin, and I would hope that they practice good security measures.
I would hope so too.
I imagine they do.
Yeah.
I imagine a lot of these professional custodian firms.
What would happen?
Do that.
Please, I know I've asked you many times before, but what would happen if QBTC did get robbed, or they'd lost their private key, the dog ate it, or whatever?
Yeah, if you're a unit holder, you're screwed, right? Like this is Bitcoin. This is Bitcoin, and there's no bailouts, right? Like the Canadian government can't step in and say, well, can we speak to the president of Bitcoin? Can we have him issue or her issue an extra $694 million worth of Bitcoin because we promised this other stuff was lost? Like Bitcoin's uncensorable and there's no rollbacks. So if these funds were to lose their coins, then you would lose your value in the investment. So you are trusting them to custody your coins.
Right.
All of these funds, if you visit their web pages,
that's in the terms and conditions, right? When you sign up, if we lose your Bitcoin,
I'm sure.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sure that's somewhere in that's going to be in the prospectus of these things for sure. Wow. I think that there's a couple of other, like, if we're really getting into the weeds, there's a couple of other really nice features in
you mentioned
QBTC.
You explained before that if there's a certain liquidation or whatever they go through, then there's a process whereby you can get your Bitcoin back. Bitcoin that your shares represented can be just given to you as actual physical Bitcoin, which is the weirdest term for something that has a physical element.
So in the most extreme case, the QBTC prospectus says that, first of all, all unit holders have a redemption right, which is like if you can't sell your unit in the market, you can instruct QBTC to sell the Bitcoins connected to your unit and give you the money that they get for selling the Bitcoin, right? And they're required to sell it at the market rate. So you could actually cash out your Bitcoin that way. And it says even further that if there's no market, like if there's no market for Bitcoin at all, which either like Bitcoin's gone to zero or the dollar's gone to zero, that would be the case, then they'll return your value to you in specie, which is SPECIE, which is the Bitcoin. They'll actually give you the Bitcoin. So if Bitcoin goes to zero, you can get your Bitcoin back. But I think at the kind of extreme case, which probably wasn't really contemplated, if there's no bid for Bitcoin in dollars because nobody's valuing dollars anymore, then you could actually get your Bitcoin out of this fund. Who
That's
knows what kind
more
of world
likely
that would be?
scenario, in my opinion. I mean,
Yeah, I know. It does feel like which is going to die first, Bitcoin or the dollar? Well, Bitcoin seems to be unkillable. So
I think the
by
dollar,
process of
I mean, which
elimination,
dollar, right? If it's the Zimbabwe, Mozambique, those
right?
dollars, they're already dead, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's only a matter of time before
yeah,
these government
right.
scams are completely.
Well, yeah.
If you give
So,
people something better,
yeah,
then the worst option is just not. I mean, how many people ride horses? It's just not a lot of people ride horses because
right,
there's something
right.
better now. That doesn't mean
Yeah,
that they didn't stop being around, but
yeah, yeah. So listen, those are really that's the bread and butter of of this discussion, right? Like
yeah,
there's these great instruments that exist now. You can invest in Bitcoin. These things mirror the price of Bitcoin very, very closely. You can get money back from the government if you're putting these things into your RSP, or you can at the very least avoid having to pay any future taxes on gains if you're putting them into your TFSA. And so they're generally uh, something that I think is very reasonable for people to consider.
yeah. Well, how would you compare this to investing in a company like MicroStrategy, who has basically become the same sort of thing? Like
Yeah,
buying them is
sure.
a proxy for buying Bitcoin, but you can
Yeah,
do it through the traditional financial system.
right. Well, this is pure Bitcoin following than MicroStrategy. I own some shares in MicroStrategy too, and I love I love what Michael Saylor is doing. I don't even know. I mean, I know what MicroStrategy does as a business, but I'm not invested in MicroStrategy principally because they're a business intelligence company. I'm invested in them principally because they seem to be buying a whole lot of Bitcoin, and I expect that to go up in price. Uh, the thing with MicroStrategy is, the price is like 3/4 Bitcoin and 1/4 business intelligence software. So it's not as pure a tracking, and they'll do some financial engineering. So I think if you're investing in MicroStrategy, the price will generally follow the price of Bitcoin for the most part. But there may be things that Michael Saylor, he's a really smart guy. There may be some things that he's going to do to try to double or triple the returns against Bitcoin, like borrowing through leverage to buy Bitcoin. Those funds aren't going to do that for you. But at the same time, you're also buying into a business intelligence company. And if you're not that interested in business intelligence, you just want to track the price of Bitcoin, you're going to get that goal better achieved by investing in QBTC or
Yeah,
BTCG.
it has fewer externalities going into QBTC. MicroStrategy is, I agree, there's a lot more going on there.
Yeah.
But and this, by the same token, there's some freedom there. You're sort of trusting someone who, like Michael Saylor, will just say, "Okay, I'm borrowing $500 million and I'm going to buy Bitcoin with it."
Yeah.
Like he does these radical moves, right, which can make
I
stock prices jump.
that's why I own some of that in addition to the QBTC that I own, because I thought, Michael Saylor's a very, very, very smart guy and a very committed guy, and he's got lots of passion and he's very ambitious and he's got resources. And so why on earth wouldn't I put some money into MicroStrategy? That was my thinking. So again, not financial advice for others, just sharing what went through my
Yeah,
mind when I made some of these investments.
I guess we should have said that at the beginning. Really, I forgot.
Nothing here is
I mean,
financial advice.
none of this is financial advice.
I
Uh,
think we have to say that because we're not legally allowed to give financial advice.
yeah, for sure. And
Mhm.
don't come at us. Uh, don't come at us with anything. We're not telling you to buy anything or invest anything.
Right,
Um,
right,
but I've found these were kind of mind blowing to me, these mechanisms, and I still have yet to do anything with them. I started talking with you about it
mhm,
about a month ago, and
right,
I'm moving stuff around, and I'm hoping to be able to get into it. Oh, if in case there's anyone else that's my circumstances, if you just got to Canada, how does your TFSA work? Does it go back all the way, or does it only come when
No,
you started?
I
Oh,
believe again. I believe it only you only get the grant for every year that you lived in Canada, not on the planet Earth. So you have to have been a Canadian to start earning this. And the same thing with the RSP. You had to have filed your taxes in Canada and declared an income in Canada to get an RSP allocation.
fair enough. Yeah, I'd like to start taking advantage of some of this stuff soon, and
Mhm.
I'd encourage anyone else to do it as well. Um, uh, it's a bit of a one thing I like to point out, which is a bit of a doomsday scenario. But if if government in Canada turns on Bitcoin hard, then you're going to be in a tough position if you're holding funds this way. And part of Bitcoin's principal design is to be able to resist confiscation by authorities. And you can't
Mhm.
do it if they're held in funds like this. So you're walking away from one of Bitcoin's um,
Yeah.
main, I guess, I don't know, main strengths really, and main things that makes it attractive.
Yeah,
But
self-custody is certainly one of Bitcoin's great features. And I think, and this again is why I personally don't hold all my Bitcoin in the form of QBTC. Most of the people I know who are investing in it also are of the same thing. It's there's a trade-off, and I think it's important though that we do see institutions like this do well, because the more things like this do well, the more Canadians broadly have a stake in publicly held Bitcoin,
yeah,
the less likely the government, or the less popular it would be for the government to try to seize on Bitcoin. And I do think we've passed that point in history where at any moment a government could ban Bitcoin, right? Like we're really at a point in time where Bitcoin's too big to be banned, and the governments are in fact stepping back. Like these funds are all approved by all the governmental bodies, right? So
yeah,
they've been through the regulatory process. They've been to the QBTC actually had to go to court to get permission from a judge, and the judge ruled that uh,
you can do it.
it's fine. It's fine for Canadians to be able to buy Bitcoin through these
That's
types of
that's
things.
really interesting to know. How conservative are they usually with the process of get like supposing you say I want to buy, a bunch of Star Wars or like baseball cards from 1955, and I'm going to
Yeah.
divide it all up in the same way, and you can buy shares in my company. Are they generally rubber stamping all this stuff, or is it pretty
No.
hard to get approved for this stuff?
I don't think anything like what you just described, I don't think anything like that exists in trades on the TSX. And I know that the president of QBTC, Fred Pye, he had to go through over 3 years of seeking regulatory approvals to get this. It, you know, they started doing this back in 2017, I believe, and they didn't get permission until 2020. There was all kinds of long stories. I think he's done a podcast on Pomp's podcast, so you can find over there his story. I think he's done a couple of podcasts, but he might have also been on the brink with Castle Island, and so you can hear his whole story. But they had to go through a lot to get these things approved, and now that they're approved, they've been wildly popular. Like he's gone from zero in the beginning of 2020 to $700 million practically in a very short period of time. Can you imagine a business getting that kind of funds in such a short period of time? The demand for this stuff is crazy high, and it's just because it's such a great product for funds, for family offices, and for individuals like me and you.
Yeah, I agree, and I think even there's just this massive incentive with this stuff where it's investing in Bitcoin in such a different way with this tax break that you can get with
Mhm.
the RRSP. Where I mean, if your circumstances are such where I mean, a lot of people haven't had much of an income because of COVID, but if you're in a situation where your tax bill just hit and you're paying your income was like 100 grand or more, your tax bill is so high. And if you take a bunch of that income and put it into an RRSP with Bitcoin exposure, and you get 50% of what you would have paid as tax back pretty much, that's
Yeah.
that's just that's a complete no-brainer to me to do that. Like,
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, I think no matter, yeah. no matter what you're doing, you should always strive to maximize your investment in these kinds of securities, because even if you just buy bonds that aren't going to do anything, the government's going to give you your taxes back in the RSP. But I think it's when you have something as special as Bitcoin has been, which has been the best performing asset for 8 of the last 10 years and the best performing asset over that whole period of time, it's really special to be able to do something like that and be able to get those gains tax free. And you can log, like if in an RSP, even if you were to think, okay, well, Bitcoin's had the end of its run and exited, you still wouldn't have to pay taxes until it was time to take your funds out of the RSP. So if you get a good run and you freak out and you just want to have it in cash, crazy as that might be, because hyperinflation might be around the corner, you could do that, and that's a safe thing to do.
So how would if you were to sell any units of QBTC, I've never used an account like that. Or do you just end up with dollars back in your brokerage account?
Yeah. So again, depending on what type of account, you can have just a plain investment account, which is not tax sheltered. You can have a TFSA, you can have an RSP. You put your money in it originally, then you buy the units, and if you sell them, you end up with money back in the account. So and if you buy MicroStrategy shares, you have MicroStrategy shares, and if you sell them, you end up with money back in the account. Pretty basic. With your TFSA, you can take the money out whenever you want without having to pay taxes on it. But it's generally a good idea to just keep the money in there and let it grow until you absolutely need it. And the RSP, as I said, you're really not meant to take any money out of it until you're retiring. You can take it out while you're still working, but you're going to pay income on your income tax on your income and income tax on the money you're taking out of your RSP. So you might want to wait until Canada has much lower tax rates, which might be around the corner.
Yeah,
probably not right around.
I don't think so. I definitely think those are going to go up rather than down. I don't think anyone is sort of running around after the COVID austerity measures going, won't someone please think of the people paying the highest tax rates?
We'll just have to see what happens. I mean, it's such crazy times financially with all the money being spent by government. Lots of predictions out there. We probably shouldn't get into them because that's a podcast right there.
Yeah, I agree. It's way too much of a tangent for this, but I definitely, basically, I'm starting to get the impression that the TFSA is just free money. If you're a tax-paying Canadian and you're not using a TFSA, then that's just. I mean, you could even just 50% of your tax comes back, right? Like so.
That's in your RSP. Your TFSA, you don't get. They don't give you money.
Sorry, yeah.
So it's just your RSP where you get the money back from the government. That's a real no-brainer, right? Like if you are able to save money, and you have RSP allocation, save your money in your RSP because the government's going to give you back the taxes against it.
Yeah.
Right? And the TFSA, I think it's kind of interesting because people who are very conservative investors and don't want to take risks. In a time like now where interest rates are less than 1%, many of them say, why bother? Like I could, so I pay income tax on the negligible income that I make if I invested in a savings account. And that's a very valid opinion, right? Like bonds just don't pay anything and GICs don't pay anything. But you can put anything you want into a TFSA. The SA stands for savings account, but it allows you to put anything in it, not just savings instruments. And if you put something like something that's growth oriented in there, like Bitcoin, and it does well, it's terrific because you don't end up having to pay those taxes later.
But supposing you've got $5,000, you can put in your TFSA, and you put $5,000 in, and you buy Bitcoin with it in QBTC, and then it goes up to $1 million, and then you sell that. You're not paying any tax.
No tax.
Unbelievable, because
could go to $1 billion.
Scenario.
Right.
That's incredible. It's absolutely. I mean, that's wow. I can't believe that exists. I mean, it must all be predicated on the assumption that no one could ever find an investment that's going to do that, or they'd be so lucky.
Well, these aren't huge amounts of money, right? Letting you save $6,000 a year, we should bow to the government to say, all this money that I've earned after I've paid income tax on it, you're allowing me to save 6,000 of what's left over in a way that if it grows, I don't have to pay tax on it. So it's like, we shouldn't be too grateful for this. Like, it's our money. It's our money after taxes have already been stripped from it. And now they're going to, unless you put it in there, they're going to take more of that money away if it grows.
Yeah.
So we should know who's on the right side here, right? The taxes are money that's taken from you without your consent, and the government lays a claim to as much of it as they want. Here they're, they seem magnanimous by letting you keep some of it without them taking another chunk out of it.
Yeah, of course.
Not as generous as you might think otherwise.
No, I'm not trying to. Yeah, I don't want to come across as grateful, even though it's still good and I still want to take it. But at the same time, like, no,
Yeah.
I mean, that's another rabbit hole. I mean,
right.
If you can get away with, like, this whole idea behind this is to try and do as well as you can and get taxed as little as possible, which is, I don't know where I mean, without going off on an ideological discussion, I mean, there are those who will defend taxation as a thing and say, my roads and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, they're not going to voluntarily ever pay more than they have to. I've never seen anyone deliberately not claim expenses so that they could just pay more taxes. So this whole idea that, no, the government, we should pay taxes and whatever number they come up with is exactly the right number. So like, it's weird. Like, either you're into tax or you're not, but the idea of just paying.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, you could have someone on your show who makes that claim, and you can ask them, you can challenge them, right? If someone says, I love paying taxes, and you could ask them to disclose whether or not they took any deductions, or they took any and all deductions that they had the right to take. And chances are they did the rational thing, which was take all the deductions. So there's a bit of tension between, look, I'm all for civilization. I just think I've seen so much irresponsibility in how the governments handle funds. There's no reason to tax people 50% if you're responsible about how you're spending the money. But there just isn't that much responsibility out there. So, but we're going off onto a different topic now, aren't we?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, but probably too much of a tangent again.
Yeah.
Can't help it.
In the context of this discussion, we accept that taxes exist. We accept that the government gives you certain tools to reduce the amount of tax you have to pay, and we're discussing how to use those tools to their finest within the context of Bitcoin, which is the topic of your podcast always, or your channel here always. And so, here's how you can mix those things together. That's probably.
I mean, you could buy Tesla with a TFSA or an RRSP as well, and, or any other meme stock that is just pumping and pumping, but. I mean, you say this is a Bitcoin channel, like, well done if you bought Tesla, and double well done if you did it with the tax-free thing as well.
Right.
Congrats. Yeah. But yeah, no, it's a fantastic mechanism. And I think generally, the fact that it exists and it's available to Bitcoiners now is a pretty significant thing, especially if you have a huge income and you're looking. I don't know. If you have a huge income, it's possible you already understand this stuff anyway. I certainly don't know many people myself that are paying income tax at those high thresholds. If most of the people I know, if I'm being honest, that have a lot of money because of Bitcoin. And therefore, if they ever try to access that money, they're going to be paying a lot of taxes. They're not about to be able to get into Bitcoin right now with lots of money that they have. That doesn't tend to be the kind of person I know. But I'm hoping that this information finds its way into the hands of people that can actually use it. It's particularly useful for someone that's just like got an inheritance, or just got it was just selling a house or something like that, where there's just suddenly a big amount of money available.
Yeah, and I wouldn't, I think you come from a particular background, but the majority of people have come by their money through working for a living and paying income taxes, and those are all the people who have RSP. I'm not saying you didn't work for a living, but you've immigrated into the country recently.
It's all my employment is all like, I never know what to write on any application when they ask me what my job is. No clue how to answer questions like that. It's
self-employed.
I say I work in IT.
That's not bad. That's not bad. But I think that there are the vast majority of people in the country or have made their income through taxable income, and so they'll have RSP limits, and they'll be able to take advantage of what we've discussed here.
Is there anything? Is there any variation within provincial laws and things like that? Does anything change from BC to Alberta?
I actually don't know at all. I would say it depends on, it probably is a function of the taxation rates, but I'm a resident of Ontario, and I've filed my taxes in Ontario my whole life. So I think the distinctions are subtle. Like I know these things, the RSPs and the TFSAs are federally granted, but it may be that the amount that you're allowed to contribute in different provinces is, it's actually probably the case that if you live in a lower tax jurisdiction province like Alberta, your tax savings from an RSP contribution are smaller than if you live in a high tax bracket area. But you generally get the benefits of living in a lower tax regime in the first place.
It's like what you were alluding to earlier. Like the more tax you pay in the first place, the more attractive these things are.
Yeah,
if you live in, I'd say I'd wager that your average Mexican or like anyone down there, like I feel like they're paying much lower taxes generally. So products like have less reason to exist than you just buy Bitcoin proper.
Right. I have no idea what income taxes are in Mexico. I don't know if it's a high tax regime or a low tax regime.
I feel like it's super low tax. I mean, I would be very surprised if they had high taxes there, but at the same time, I've done zero research, so I don't.
Well, it's an interesting piece of follow-up to do.
Yeah, I'll definitely check that out. I see a lot of Bitcoiners there's this whole movement in Bitcoin at the moment of having fuck you passports, like just this buying passports for Panama and.
Yeah, flag theory, it's called, right? And there's a number of countries, a couple in Western Europe, but many in the Caribbean that will actually, just for about $150,000 give you and your direct family, your spouse and dependents, a passport to their country with like a 6-month application process. And I don't know exactly what that is, what that helps you do from a tax perspective. I know from a sovereignty perspective, like a Canadian passport's a really good passport for traveling. American, slightly less so nowadays, but
I don't remember what's that again.
Travel was when you not only left your house, which was a special luxury, but you could actually not only leave your city, but even leave the country on these flying machines. None of us have done that in nearly a year now, but that was a pretty special thing that you can tell your kids about.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like maybe these passports are going to get more useful then, because it might be the only instance in which you're allowed to get on a plane is if you're flying home, right? So if you're like, they can't deny you flying to Mexico. They can if you're on vacation, maybe, but they're not going to be.
Well, you know what? What's interesting now that we're really getting into something, and not only am I not an investment advisor, I'm not a lawyer, but Canada has a document called the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and there's a part in it called mobility rights, and it says that every citizen of Canada has the right to enter, stay in, and leave the country. So at any point in time, if someone's telling you can't leave the country, you actually have a constitutional right to do so.
But does that hold any water? Because I mean, you
might have to take it to court.
Freedom of speech, right? And then look what happened to their president.
Yeah, I think it's kind of we're living in a time where we really do have to challenge those who would take away our rights. But there's no question that as a Canadian, you're allowed to move about within Canada and stay in the country and leave the country. Right? That's very clear language in the Bill of Rights. In the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Sorry.
That's good to know. Yeah, the Bill of Rights is America, right?
That's right. Yeah.
What's it called? The Charter of Rights?
The Charter of Rights and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Well, personally, I'm sorry if this has gone off on a bit of a tangent, but I'm personally thinking about, it seems like the entire world won't let you in except Mexico right now. And Mexico.
You're hearing a lot about Mexico. I just haven't been paying enough attention to Mexico. Other than I heard a really good joke, which was, after the events of January 6th, Mexico has said that they will pay for the wall, which was I thought that was a very clever joke.
Yeah, I heard that too. I heard their president. I see a bunch of presidents decrying big tech censorship, which is. It seems like they're trying to close the door after the barn door after the horse has bolted with that one. Like I feel like they're all about to, if they can censor the American president off big tech, then they can censor, Angela Merkel or whoever. Like, these are American companies, right? What do they care if, I mean,
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that, someone I saw just shared on Facebook that Twitter was complaining that I can't remember if it was in Uganda or there's some African country that's having elections now, and they're saying that that the sources are interfering with social media and
yeah,
and people's ability to talk. And it's like okay,
I like this
pot calling the kettle black, right?
I like this whole meme of if you don't like it, just start your own Uganda. Like
Right.
every like the private company defense for everything. It's
Yes.
like, oh,
Yeah. Just
like,
start your own. Just write your own operating
yeah,
system.
or just
Start
like
your own internet.
I was just slashed in the neck by one of those Boston Dynamic like RoboCop dog things. It's like, they're a private company. It's fine if you don't like them. Just buy their own. Just buy different products, man.
Right.
Like the meme of like just
Yeah.
Twitter and Facebook have become, now that you're not allowed outside, all communication is done through big tech platforms like Zoom
Yeah.
and Facebook and
Right.
Twitter. And the idea that it's like,
Right.
hey, they don't have to host your content if you don't want to. It's like, well, then I've got no other way to communicate. Even if I'm like a huge, I don't know, a huge political figure or something. It's
Yeah.
funny, man. It's funny, but
No, we're living in a very strange time. Like I'm not sure that I wish there were more private companies, but it's not clear how private companies are, like to what degree they're manipulated by, they're regulated by laws. So they're not doing everything that they would choose to do. They're doing what government is telling them to do in some respects. Many of them are receiving handouts from government in exchange for certain things. So they're only quasi-private and they're quasi-public to some degree, and they're certainly in these monopolistic positions, which other regulations have prevented other competitors from getting into the market. Like it's so expensive to operate a company now for regulatory reasons that it's very, very hard for you or me to start our own Twitter. I do think that a lot of this stuff is going to change, though. I mean, because it's just out of necessity, right? Like we have to depart from these platforms.
I think this recent the whole deplatforming of Trump that was them overplaying their hand, I think. And I think that's gonna backlash quite hard because there's too many people pissed off about it now. Like there's 70 odd million people that voted for the guy and now he's not allowed to talk anymore.
Right.
While still president, by the way. So I mean, that's no way that there can't be some. I don't know how they will galvanize or organize in any capacity, because every single Facebook group or anything to do with Trump is now is sort of borderline being a domestic terrorist organization. And like, I don't know whether this video is even going to make it up now. Like I'm not trying to be too melodramatic about it, but it's a unbelievable thing, and it was obviously going to happen. But now that it's here, I just can't. Nonetheless, I'm still gobsmacked by the whole thing.
Yeah, it's very hard to predict exactly what's going to happen, if everything will just gradually die down and a new peace of sorts will emerge, or if the tensions will continue to escalate. Right now, everything seems so terribly polarized. We're kind of in this muted. This is a few days. This is like 6 days after Trump got deplatformed, so everything still seems kind of muted and quiet. But it's very hard to know what's going to happen.
When is Biden officially president?
Now you're asking me as though I'm an American constitutional scholar, which I'm not. But I think it's the 20th, from what I seem to remember hearing on the news. So we still got like 7 or 8 days to go before the next milestone in this presidential situation happens.
I think what I expect to happen is a sort of uneasy peace emerges for a year or two, but not one where everyone is really pissed off and there's a lot of problems, but none of those are really. I think they have to create. It's going to be politically useful for the Democrats to create the perception of stability and calm, and COVID has been dealt with, and the vaccine was successful, and we're reopening. Even if that's not the case at all, it's going to be, our economy is recovering. 5-year plan, whatever. Like, I think it's going to be. Wow, we're way off topic, but
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Maybe we should wrap up this this interview,
yeah,
and you and I can talk offline about all these other really interesting topics.
yeah, I'd
But
like to
if
do.
people were listening for tax reasons, we've definitely departed from that
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean,
topic.
anything else you want to mention about that before we put that to bed?
No, listen. I think maybe just to summarize again, these opportunities exist for you to reduce your taxes, reduce the taxes payable on your growth and investments. And now the instruments exist that those instruments can actually be populated by Bitcoin. And so if you're interested in investing in Bitcoin in ways that'll save on your taxes, this is what we discussed here is what you ought to do.
Okay. And do you want people to bother you on Twitter or Mastodon now, which is where everyone goes?
Yeah, Twitter is still where I spend most of my time. If you want to hear me, maybe I'll find myself more on bitcoinhackers.org Mastodon, but just at Tomer Strolight on Bitcoin on Twitter and Bitcoin Twitter. And you can get a hold of me there.
Cool. All right. Thanks so much, man. And we'll end it there. And
Yeah,
yeah, I'll stop the video and we'll probably continue
sure.
talking.